Sarah pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she watched little Emma play on the swings, the autumn wind carrying the scent of fallen leaves through the quiet neighborhood park. At 24, Sarah had been working as a nanny for nearly 2 years, moving from one temporary position to another, never quite finding the stability she craved. Her current job with the Morrison family was supposed to last only 3 weeks while Emma's regular nanny recovered from surgery, but those 3 weeks had stretched into 2 months, and Sarah had grown deeply attached to the precocious 5-year-old. Emma's laughter rang out across the playground as she pumped her legs higher, her dark curls catching the late afternoon sunlight. Sarah smiled, remembering how shy and withdrawn the little girl had been when they first met. Emma's father, David Morrison, was always rushing off to important meetings, his phone constantly buzzing with urgent calls. He seemed kind enough, if distant, and Sarah had assumed he worked in some demanding corporate job that required long hours and frequent travel. The sound of screeching tires shattered the peaceful afternoon. Sarah looked up to see a black sedan speeding around the corner, taking the turn too fast for the residential street. Her heart lurched as she realized the car was heading straight for the playground area where Emma was swinging, seemingly oblivious to any danger. "Emma!" Sarah screamed, sprinting toward the swings. The little girl looked up, confused by the panic in her nanny's voice. The car jumped the curb, its driver apparently having lost control, and barreled toward the playground equipment. Sarah reached Emma just as the car crashed into the wooden fence surrounding the play area, missing the swings by mere feet. The impact sent splinters flying and caused Emma to tumble from her swing in terror. Sarah scooped the child into her arms, shielding her with her own body as debris scattered around them. Emma was trembling violently, her small fists clutching Sarah's sweater as sobs racked her tiny frame. "I want my daddy," she whispered between tears. "I want my daddy right now." Sarah's own hands were shaking as she held Emma close, but she forced her voice to remain calm and soothing. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. I've got you." She carried Emma to a bench far from the crash site, noting that the driver appeared to be uninjured but clearly shaken as he climbed out of his vehicle. Other parents and passers-by had begun to gather, some calling emergency services while others checked on the driver. Sarah focused entirely on Emma, who was still crying and asking for her father. Sarah knew David was in meetings all afternoon and rarely answered his phone during business hours, but she tried calling him anyway. When it went straight to voicemail, she left a message explaining what had happened and asking him to call back immediately. "My daddy's really important," Emma sniffled, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "He has lots of meetings with important people. That's why he can't come to my school plays or have dinner with me very much." Sarah's heart ached for the little girl. She had noticed that David was often absent, leaving early in the morning and returning after Emma's bedtime. When he was home, he seemed loving but distracted, always checking his phone or taking calls. Sarah had initially judged him as another workaholic parent who prioritized career over family, but now she wondered if there was more to the story. "I know your daddy loves you very much," Sarah said softly, rocking Emma gently. "Sometimes grown-ups have to work really hard, but that doesn't mean they don't think about you all the time." As sirens approached and emergency vehicles arrived to handle the accident scene, Sarah continued to comfort Emma. She sang the little girl's favorite lullaby, the one about the mockingbird, and slowly felt the tension leave Emma's small body. When Emma finally stopped crying and looked up with red-rimmed eyes, Sarah wiped her tears with a tissue and smiled reassuringly. "Can we go home now?" Emma asked in a small voice. "I don't want to play here anymore." "Of course we can go home," Sarah agreed, gathering their things. As they walked the 3 blocks back to the Morrison house, Emma slipped her hand into Sarah's and squeezed tight. The Morrison home was a modest 2-story house in a middle-class neighborhood, comfortable but not ostentatious. Sarah had always assumed David worked a typical corporate job that paid well enough to afford a nanny but wasn't particularly lucrative. The furniture was nice but not luxurious, and there were no obvious signs of excessive wealth. Once home, Sarah made Emma her favorite snack of apple slices with peanut butter and put on a Disney movie to help distract her from the afternoon's trauma. Emma cuddled close to Sarah on the couch, still occasionally shuddering at the memory of the crash. It wasn't until nearly 7 o'clock that David finally called back. Sarah stepped into the kitchen to take the call, keeping Emma in sight through the doorway. "Sarah, I got your message. Is Emma okay? What happened?" David's voice was tight with worry. Sarah quickly explained the accident, emphasizing that Emma was physically unharmed but had been quite shaken by the experience. "She's been asking for you all afternoon," Sarah added gently. "She really needs to see you." "I'm leaving right now," David said without hesitation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah was surprised by how quickly he arrived. Most evenings, David's commute seemed to take at least 45 minutes, leading her to assume his office was across town. When he burst through the front door, still wearing an expensive-looking suit but with his tie askew and his hair disheveled, Emma launched herself into his arms. "Daddy! You came!" Emma cried, wrapping her arms around his neck. David held his daughter tightly, his eyes closing as if in relief. "Of course I came, baby girl. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when it happened." He looked over Emma's head at Sarah, his expression full of gratitude. "Thank you," he mouthed silently. Sarah nodded, feeling oddly emotional at the scene. She had seen David with Emma before, of course, but something about this moment felt different. The way he held his daughter, the genuine fear and relief in his eyes, the way he had apparently dropped everything to rush home, it painted a different picture of him than she had initially formed. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed changes in David's routine. He came home earlier, had dinner with Emma more often, and seemed more present when he was with his daughter. Emma, meanwhile, had developed a slight case of separation anxiety, clinging to both Sarah and her father more than usual. It was during this time that Sarah began to piece together clues about David's true profession. She noticed expensive cars occasionally parked outside their modest home, their drivers waiting patiently while well-dressed men and women came inside for brief meetings with David. His phone calls, which she couldn't help overhearing, involved discussions of board meetings, quarterly reports, and million-dollar decisions. The revelation came by accident. Sarah was helping Emma with a school project about different jobs when Emma pulled out a magazine article she had saved. "This is my daddy," she announced proudly, pointing to a photograph. Sarah's breath caught as she read the headline, "Morrison Tech CEO Leads Industry Innovation." The article featured a professional photo of David Morrison, identifying him as the founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. According to the article, his company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Sarah stared at the magazine, trying to reconcile this information with the man she knew. David Morrison wasn't just successful, he was wealthy beyond anything she had imagined. Yet he lived in a regular neighborhood, drove a nice but not ostentatious car, and treated her with the same respect he would show anyone else. "Daddy started his company in our garage," Emma said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "Before I was born. Mommy used to help him, but then she went to heaven when I was little." Sarah's heart clenched at this casual mention of Emma's mother. She had wondered about the absence of a mother figure in the house but had never felt comfortable asking. Now she understood why David seemed so protective of Emma, why he sometimes looked at his daughter with such intense love mixed with worry. That evening, after Emma was asleep, David found Sarah in the kitchen finishing the dishes. She had been debating whether to mention her discovery, unsure if she was supposed to know about his true identity. "Emma showed me the magazine article today," Sarah said quietly, not looking up from the sink. David was silent for a long moment. When Sarah finally turned around, she found him leaning against the door frame, looking suddenly tired despite his expensive suit. "I was wondering when you'd find out," he admitted. "Most people change when they learn about the money. They start treating Emma differently, or they start treating me differently." Sarah dried her hands on a dish towel, considering his words. "Is that why you live here instead of some mansion in the hills? Why Emma goes to regular public school instead of some exclusive private academy?" David smiled ruefully. "Partly. After my wife died, I realized that all the money in the world couldn't protect Emma from loss, from pain, from the things that really matter. I wanted her to have as normal a childhood as possible. I wanted her to be valued for who she is, not what her father has in the bank." "But your work," Sarah said, still trying to understand. "The long hours, the constant travel. If you're the CEO, couldn't you delegate more?" David's expression grew complicated. "The company is my responsibility. Thousands of people depend on it for their livelihoods. And honestly, after my wife died, throwing myself into work was easier than dealing with the grief. But lately, especially after what happened at the park, I've been questioning my priorities." Sarah thought about the terror in Emma's voice that afternoon, how desperately the little girl had wanted her father. "She needs you," Sarah said simply. "Not the CEO, not the successful businessman. Just her dad." "I know," David said softly. "I've been telling myself that providing for her future was the most important thing, but I think I've been hiding behind that excuse. The truth is, sometimes being with her hurts because she reminds me so much of her mother. But that's my issue to work through, not Emma's burden to bear." Over the following weeks, Sarah watched David make genuine efforts to be more present in Emma's life. He started working from home 2 days a week, attended Emma's school events, and instituted a no phones during dinner rule. Emma bloomed under the increased attention, her confidence returning as her separation anxiety faded. Sarah found herself in an unusual position. She was no longer just the temporary nanny hired to fill in during an emergency. David had offered to make her position permanent, with a salary that was far more generous than anything she had imagined possible. But more than that, she had become part of their small family unit, someone Emma trusted completely and someone David relied on not just for childcare but for emotional support and perspective. The afternoon at the park had been terrifying, but it had also been a turning point. In comforting a scared little girl, Sarah had unknowingly helped heal a family that had been struggling with grief, guilt, and the challenge of balancing love with responsibility. She had shown both Emma and David that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer isn't money or success, but simply being present in the moment when someone needs you most. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed one evening, the little girl looked up at her with serious eyes. "I'm glad you were at the park that day," Emma said. "Not because of the scary car, but because you made everything okay." Sarah smiled, smoothing Emma's dark curls. "That's what people do when they care about each other. We take care of each other." Emma nodded solemnly. "Daddy said you're not just our nanny anymore. He said you're part of our family now." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so much of her life moving from one temporary situation to another, never quite finding where she belonged. She never could have imagined that comforting a frightened child would lead her to discover not just a secret about wealth and success, but something far more valuable, a place where she was needed, valued, and loved for exactly who she was.